experts who are Jason Pourakis, which is responsible for our entrepreneurship group, and also Ryan, which is a tax specialist with the group. They spent the last 15 days working on this act. This act is about 335 pages. It has been released at the Senate on March 19 and was signed into law on March 27. And we can really apply for those loans only 1 week ago. So you have to understand it's an act which has been written very quickly and available for us like not more than 15 days ago. So a lot of questions exist, a lot of question has been answered, and this act is quick. It's always still evolving every day. So that you have to understand that. We are going to focus more on two sections of the act, which is keeping American workers paid and employed, and also all about the assistance for American workers. There is also two other sections which are related to healthcare support and also for specific distressed sectors. Okay, so we are going to discuss quickly. We are going to talk about an overview of the CARES Act and also about eligibility, which is very important. A lot of questions exist on the eligibility for French company. Private equity are pretty mad about that because most of the time they are not eligible. Certain not-for-profit are not eligible. So we discuss a little bit about that. We'll give you some example also about our experience. Are the funding coming from the banks today? What is the process? Is it a difficult process? Or is it going on, you know? And we can give you our testimony on that. And then we'll focus a little bit more on the two loans which exist, which are the PPP loan, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the EIDL loan. The PPP loan is very interesting for a lot of people because there is a big forgiveness part of it. And then there is not only the CARES Act available today. We will discuss maybe about all the opportunities which exist beside the CARES Act, and especially there is a new funding available since I think yesterday from the Fed. We didn't hear a lot about it, but it's very important for you to be aware of it. So Jason, can you start discussing a little bit about the CARES Act and all the specificities?
Yep. Yeah, so thank you, Pierre-Marie, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So as Pierre-Marie has framed out pretty well, we're going to try to give you a high-level summary, but also a more real-world and pragmatic set of observations that we've been seeing in the marketplace over the last 2 weeks. The Act has really started in earnest and in operations over the last week, where people were able to put in their Paycheck Protection Program applications. And in that time, on a daily basis, we've seen changes to interpretations of the law and what makes up what is eligible and what is not eligible. So it is a moving target. We're going to give you our best, most up-to-date interpretation of a lot of the various laws that are changing. So just to go over an overview of the CARES Act that was signed into law. The CARES Act is a $2 trillion act with federal funds that is used to battle the COVID-19 and the economic effects around it. This includes the component of immediate cash relief for individuals, a component for large corporations and protection against any insolvency issues. And what affects most of the entrepreneurs in the middle market are the loan programs for the small businesses. And we're going to get into more detail around those types of loans. So Title I of the CARES Act talks about the Paycheck Protection Program. There was $349 billion that was allocated for relief for a covered period of February through June in 2020. It's administered by the Small Business Association, the SBA, but it's funded directly through the banking community. So you will be able to apply for these loans, if you haven't already, directly through your banking relationship. So in terms of eligibility, the CARES Act around both the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL are primarily for companies with less than 500 employees, unless you qualify for certain industries. So there are some nuances to the law which allow industries such as food and hospitality, or franchises, to look at the eligibility requirements at a location by location level. So you may have more than 500 employees in totality, but in order to assist those companies that were affected the greatest in certain areas, and one being the food and hospitality sector, the ability is to be able to have those loans addressed at a location by location level. So the Paycheck Protection Program, what is it? It's the current SBA loan program that's been amended to increase the lending to a maximum of $10 million per eligible borrower. Currently, and this has changed several times since we first started reading the act, the amount of the loan that's not forgiven, and we'll get into the forgiven piece later, currently has a 6-month deferral provision, which means that you wouldn't have to pay it back after the testing period for 6 months, and a 24-month payback with a 1% interest rate. So within the act, there's a provision to forgive all or a portion of the loan. And we'll discuss that further in the details around the 8-week testing period that makes up the allocation between what can be forgiven and what would be converted into a loan. But this period takes into consideration your actual use of the funds that would be loaned to you and the head count that you've maintained through that period. So that's the stuff that a lot of people already know about and have read. I want to give you a little bit more understanding of what's happening in the real world over especially the last week since the application process has started. So what we're seeing, because it's being driven through the banks, is that the banks almost on a daily basis are changing their position in terms of how to allocate the funds and how to calculate essentially how much of a loan amount will be allocated to each person who's applying. They're taking the underwriting position where there really isn't any guidance right now from the Fed around exactly how these loans should be administered. Now, our thoughts around that are the banks being shoehorned with a loan potentially at the end without doing the proper due diligence. They want to ensure that the monies that they are lending out directly to the companies is going to be used for the exact purposes that this act was intended for, and more importantly, that the amount's going to be forgiven and taken off their balance sheet. I think that there's a fear in the banking community that these loans may end up staying on their balance sheet if they give out too much on the loan end and not enough on the forgiveness end, and the quality of those loans afterwards. So like we've said already a few times, it's a moving target as of right now, and different banks are having some different situations. Some examples. So we've done, through our firm, we've probably assisted on well over 200 applications in the last week, and we're just starting to see the banks respond back in the acceptance of the applications. And we've seen very few, but they are starting to happen, actual remittance of monies to the individuals and to the companies. So a couple banks in particular, Wells Fargo came out early in the week, and they said that they weren't going to loan to any company with more than 50 employees As of yesterday, they backtracked that and they've now opened it up to the rest of their customers with greater than 50 employees. So we've had many situations with Wells Fargo relationships where we had to go and look for alternative funding. And there are some banks out there that will take some applications that aren't prior customers, but now going back to this new situation, trying to have them reapply through Wells Fargo. Bank of America is another bank that very early on in the process, and they've still stayed to this set of rules, is that they will only give you a PPP loan if you have a current banking relationship and a piece of debt established prior to this to the crisis. Chase is another one that started late. They did not open up on Friday, but when the period started, but they opened up through the weekend. And they have come out with 2 different sets of additional information after they opened up their application process. One of which was a forecast of cash flows in the 8-week testing period, which we'll talk about a little more in detail, to ensure that they're not giving out too much of a loan that can't be fully forgiven. So that's just a few banks that in the real world that we're seeing that it's not as easy of a process as you may be hearing in the daily White House briefings, or you may be hearing in theory how this is supposed to work. The banks are taking a position of not just funding the money today and worrying about the due diligence in the next week, which we thought was what initially was going to happen, but they're taking a risk-averse stance, and they're going very cautiously now to ensure that they are protecting themselves. So that's a little bit what happened. Yeah. Yes.
This is Pierre-Marie. Have you seen already the cash coming to your client from the bank, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we're 1 week in from the process, right? So depending on the bank and how early you were able to start your process, I think what we've seen, very few come in, and they're typically on the regional smaller bank side where they have less tape to cut through in order to actually get these loans funded. The larger banks took a very, especially earlier in the week, took a very hard stance of slowing down the process to ensure that they knew exactly what was going to happen once the SBA remitted the funds. So we've seen a few. I think we've seen a lot more in the last couple of days that have actually gotten into the acceptance process rather than just the application process. So I would expect through the weekend and early next week that we're going to start to see a lot more companies actually be funded. But the actual funding are very few at this point.
And one thing we've saw is the banks have sent out legal documents for the companies to start to sign. And supposedly the funding is supposed to be available within 48 hours of the return of that signed document. So I've seen a couple of those documents come in and be signed. And we're expecting funding to be Monday, Tuesday at this point. But
okay.
So there is another loan program through this CARES Act, and that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. This is the loan that actually started pre the CARES Act being fully signed. And this is administered through the Small Business Association. This is more of a traditional type loan through the SBA. This loan originally limited companies to $2 million, and the loan provisions would be a payback period of 30 years and 3.75% for a for-profit company and 2.75% interest for a not-for-profit company. Now, this loan is the process. We had a lot of clients that started this very early because the intention was get this loan started, because it's probably going to take longer to go through underwriting and diligence. And then when the Paycheck Protection Loan comes out, get that started as well. And you have more of hopefully a decision making when they both are funded or potentially ready to be accepted. Now, the EIDL loan in the last several days have come out several different times. Well, first of all, this one, we haven't really seen any funding or movement going through this program in the real world. Now, in the last several days, they've backtracked the provisions on the the EIDL loan, and they are limiting it to a cap of $15,000 or $1,000 per employee. So a loan that started 3 weeks ago as a $2 million loan, potentially to protect a small business and to carry them through this crisis, has changed pretty significantly since it started. So my expectation, and again, these are all just our thoughts around all of this fast-moving situation, is that this economic injury disaster loan is probably going to get fully swallowed up by the Paycheck Protection Program, especially if it's going to be recapitalized and refunded in the coming weeks to give more money out. So you still have the opportunity to apply for it, and I would recommend to definitely apply for it, and if you're eligible, and see where that takes you. I know I haven't seen any actually funded, and Ryan, I don't know if you've seen any of your clients, and we've probably submitted close to 100 EIDL applications along with clients to assist them.
I haven't seen any movement on the funding for the EIDL at all, similar to you, Jason.
Okay, good. So I just want to go over some thoughts around the misconceptions of the CARES Act and some of the original information that was coming out, not just from the CARES Act, but from the original actual application that was being shared in sample form prior to last Friday to get ready for submission. So one of the biggest areas was specifically around foreign-owned companies, right? So if you read the original sample SBA application, it was very clearly stated that if you are more than a 20% owned by a foreign company, you will not be eligible. That they sent out the original SBA application, which had that in there, and it caused a lot of questions and a lot of calls and emails from our clients to fully understand. We took the position that if you are a 100% foreign-owned corporation in the U.S., you have a company in the U.S. with U.S. employees, this should not stop you from applying. So several days after that, and it'll probably take you into the timeline of early this week, there was an official revision of the SBA application, which affirmed what our stance was, that there is no provision against a foreign-owned company to apply for this loan. So I think that's a very important item to consider if you read about this a week ago and thought that you weren't going to be able to apply and you just put this on the side and didn't apply for it. So you definitely have the ability to, especially if you have a foreign-owned company in the U.S. A couple other nuances that are still active and still correct, but I have a thought process or thought around it that they're probably going to change direction, especially if there's additional funding, and that's related to affiliated groups and private equity companies. So affiliated groups in the U.S., you're not allowed to apply and you don't qualify if the group in the U.S. is more than 500 employees, and that includes all of the companies within the affiliated group. So this is difficult because you may have many different companies that are within the threshold, but in in totality, more than 500 companies does not allow you to qualify. The other example around that is private equity. So if you have a private equity fund, which has investments in multiple portfolio companies, those portfolio companies are aggregated in totality in terms of the employee headcount. So if you have 5 portfolio funds that make up more than 500 employees, you cannot apply for the loan. And this is, I think it's a big fault in the system right now, because, especially typically around private equity, you have portfolio companies that are essentially standalone companies, but now they're being treated in this affiliated grouping rules that will not allow them to receive funding.
But this is Pierre-Marie. Stay tuned, because private equity are doing a lot of lobbying with their organization right now to change that. So it may evolve. Huh? Let's see what is going to happen in the near future on that. Huh?
Yeah, it's been brought up to Congress by. It's really being driven by a lot of the associations that the portfolio companies are part of, right? So a lot of these companies are real, tangible manufacturing type companies that belong to associations, just happen to have a different ownership structure than a family-owned business or a smaller type business structure, and they're being affected. So they're all going up through lobbyists directly to Congress very, very frequently in the last several days. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to see a decision on, hopefully overturning it in the upcoming week. The other piece that,
I was just going to, a quick overview of the affiliation rules, because it's not strictly based on equity ownership. It's looked at from the SBA rules as a level of control, which can be through equity ownership, board seats, common management companies. So it's a relatively broad definition, which I think is even more in favor of the group lobbying against changing it, in that the broad definition is having negative effects even outside of just private equity. So I just wanted to give that quick overview. But
just one last thing, just to note that, again, it's very nuanced within the law, is that what we were talking about and what's related to the CARES Act, especially around the Paycheck Protection Program, included in that is 501c3 not-for-profits. 501c6 companies are not are actually allowed to be eligible for the EIDL loan, but not the Paycheck Protection Program. So the nuance there is that, you can, if you have a 501c3 not-for-profit, that is eligible, but a 6 is not eligible. So,
which doesn't make sense, by the way, no? It doesn't make sense what you say. Correct.
Yeah, I think it's more of the way that they're looking at the legal formation of the companies, and it doesn't, frankly, I think it's probably an error in the interpretation of the rules, but it's something that we may hear further clarification on as the days go
on. Jason, there is a question that I think might need an answer. JC Delaunay is asking, is that the case? You were talking about the funds and the fact of having the portfolio. Is that the case whatever the level of participation of the VC is in the company?
So VC is a whole different discussion point, right? That's, I don't know if we venture the VC, JV relationships are not eligible. But maybe if I can get maybe a bit more clarification, if the VC has active management or is that the question? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I believe depending on the level of participation of the VC within the company.
So I think it really, the SBA definition is written in such a way that it is unfavorable for taxpayers or companies with private equity or VC ownership structures. It's really based, the definition is broad and allows for the SBA to provide a significant judgment position. There's no bright line test of 20% ownership or any tangible look in this. The criteria ends with the SBA can determine control based on an aggregate of all of the above. So it's a very broad statement. It's not very favorable in a unfortunate and situation that we're in today. Maybe in a more traditional, normal SBA environment where they're trying to help the little guy, it makes more sense. In today's response to this crisis, it doesn't. It's not as favorable as we think the intent was to issue the monies to employers and keep people employed, which is why I think.
Ryan, this is Pierre-Marie.
Sure.
But let's take an example. If a VC owns 10% of a company, you think the company cannot apply because the VC has other investment with more than 500 employees? Only 10%, for example? Do we have the answer there or no?
It would really depend on the VC's activity. If the VC, and one of the more bright line statements in the criteria is if any board member has the ability to cancel or call a quorum. I forget the actual language, but it's to cancel a vote essentially, or override a vote that would be deemed as control. So if a PE or VC has that ability, regardless of ownership percentage, it could be deemed part of the controlled group.
So let's take that into a real world consideration, right? So a company A is going to apply for a loan, and they have a minority ownership by a VC. Who is controlling the quality control and the compliance around actually being administered the loan? I would expect that would go back to the bank, right? And now the bank has to make a decision, which is supposed to be made within 48 to 72 hours through their underwriting process. And I don't want to add more further confusion here, but I would tell you that depending on the bank may take a separate position. If you go to 3 different banks, you may have 3 separate positions. And worst case scenario or best case is you are provided the funding, and the funding is then deemed not to be forgiven, but it would be converted into a loan. So just to have a, sorry, my dog is barking. Just to have a real world decision tree around that, I think that you should probably apply and then see how the diligence after the fact is going to handle whether or not this is a legitimate loan or forgiveness of debt.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jean-Marie, sorry.
No, you can go on, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to move this over to Ryan and talk a little bit more about a deeper dive into the actual SBA funding. And I will take my dog and move him out of the room, and I'll listen as well.
Thanks, Jason. So I just want to do a quick overview of the loan calculation and the debt forgiveness calculation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the practical strategies that you may utilize to maximize both the loan amount and the loan forgiveness. So the starting criteria for the Paycheck Protection Program is that you make a good faith statement that due to the economic uncertainty related to COVID-19, you require the loans to continue operating and meeting payroll requirements. It's a very broad statement. It's likely intentionally made as a broad statement that economic uncertainty seems to be everywhere around us today, given the impact of COVID-19. With that said, the loan calculation, again, at a very high level quickly, because I know we want to talk about the practical implementation side of it. The loan calculation is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll for either the trailing 12 months or 2019. Payroll per person is limited to $100,000. So if you have employees over, you have to limit their payroll to $100,000 in your average monthly calculation. And in addition to payroll, you can add in the employer portion of state and local taxes paid, retirement contributions made, and health insurance payments. And again, those are all for employer contributions. The sum of those divided by 12 times 2.5 gives you your loan amount. Additionally, if you have any outstanding EIDL loans, you can roll that into the PPP by adding it to the loan amount after multiplying your average monthly salaries by 2.5. The debt forgiveness portion looks to the 8 weeks following the loan funding date. So you receive the funds and it starts your clock on 8 weeks. And in that 8-week period, your spend related to payroll, rent, utilities, and mortgage interests, the sum of that represents the maximum amount of loan forgiveness. And just this week, the SBA clarified that payroll costs must represent 75% of the forgiveness amount. So if you are in a rent-heavy, employee-light business situation, your loan forgiveness may be limited. On the loan forgiveness side, the payroll costs are relatively the same, except it is net of the FICA and federal taxes withheld. Loan calculation payroll cost is gross. Loan forgiveness payroll cost is net of taxes withheld. You still can include employer paid state and local taxes, healthcare costs, and retirement payments. Those are all still included. The rate of pay for the payroll is also limited to $100,000, similar to the loan calculation amount. And the 8-week period, the sum of those 4 buckets of costs is also subject to 2 clawback provisions. The first is related to employee headcount. Your employee headcount during the 8-week period, your average employee headcount, divided by the lesser of your average employee headcount in February and January and February of 2020, or February to June of 2019. That ratio represents a proportional reduction to your loan forgiveness amount. So if you have 10% less people, you reduce your 8-week cost by 10% to calculate your loan forgiveness amount. The other loan forgiveness clawback is related to salaries. If you reduce employee salaries by 25% or more for employees earning $100,000 and less, you have to reduce the loan forgiveness amount by the reduction in salaries. But you do have that 25% buffer to reduce salaries and not be penalized. Additionally, there's an exemption to both of those clawbacks, that if by June 30th, 2020, you have restored your headcount and or restored pay, wages and salaries to your employees, you can be exempt from the clawbacks and you would receive full or close to full loan forgiveness amount based on your 8-week spec. So that's the high level loan calculation and debt calculation. Now, Jason and I just wanted to run through a few practical planning strategies that you can implement leading up to and during the 8-week period, so you can maximize that loan forgiveness. And I think the first and really probably most important one is anticipate and model out what you think your next 2-month cash flow and expenditures are. What does your pipeline look like? Where or when do you anticipate needing to make those decisions around employees and headcount?
Yeah, so I think
I was saying it's really a management decision of what do I want to do with this loan. Do I need this loan to keep my employees and to pay those employees for 8 weeks, or do I want to keep this the cash available for the future? Since I don't know what is going to happen in the near future, do I need this cash for the future to bring back my employees and things like that? This is really a management decision of what portion of it I want to use it for my employees and have it as a forgiveness, you know. This is really a management decision. It's not easy to make it, you know.
Yeah, so just to add to what Pierre-Marie is saying, you know, I think that the loan forgiveness is a great piece to this entire puzzle, but it should not be how you're driving your ultimate business decisions. Because the fact that if there's a peace of mind factor, you know, that you're going to have cash in your bank account and you're still managing your company the way that is necessary to manage it against what your actual revenues in the now and in the near term look like, I think that's a very important driving factor. So if I was advising you as a client, we would have that business discussion first, right? So I think one of the factors that I would really look into is there's this 8-week period, testing period, but is this crisis really going to be over for 8 weeks, after 8 weeks, right? So if the monies that you received and potentially putting all of your payroll back on the books and you pay out all of this money that you received in 8 weeks and we're still not back, well, what are the next steps there, right? So I would take a more pragmatic approach and start to identify, especially on the employee side, who your key employees are and who are going to make you successful coming out of post-COVID crisis, right? So I would look to ensure that those people are either brought back on the payroll or continue on the payroll and are key people helping you figuring out the post-COVID strategy. I would then take the next tranche of people and really look at who are essential to your current levels of operations in order to produce or to service your current clients that have not been affected, that you're still currently producing or servicing for, versus non-essential employees, and really do a deep dive and model out what your company looks like for the next 8 to 12 weeks versus how much of this will be forgiven. Because at the end of the day, if you manage this correctly and there's money left over from the loan, there's no prepayment penalty. You still have a 6-month abatement to pay anything back, and you have a 24-month 1% loan on the remaining amount that as operations ramp back up and we're back to whatever the new normal may be, you'll have the ability to pay back that debt. So I would say that, you know, in terms of maximizing the debt forgiveness, there's a lot of strategies, and Ryan will take over a couple more strategies to do, but let the business drive those decisions first.
Absolutely, Jason. And this is, the planning really needs to be for the business on the other side. And you know, there's different levers to pull as you go through the 8-week period to maximize the loan forgiveness. But to Jason's point, if there's nothing you can do on the other side of this, the loan forgiveness is much less valuable. But to talk about some of those levers, one thing included in the 8-week period in the payroll cost is severance pay. If you are coming up on a period where you're going to need to furlough or lay people off, and it's during the 8-week period, you may want to consider severance payments to increase your payroll costs during that time to maximize loan forgiveness, as well as covering healthcare costs during the time. And I think Jason mentioned rent abatement. If you're working with your landlord on moving rent payments, you might want to move the ones that are in June or July rather than the one in April or May, which is likely going to be during your 8-week period, you know, assuming you apply or have applied already. So managing that from a cash flow standpoint and loan forgiveness standpoint is going to be important.
Yeah, I think just one last thing to touch on here as well that we didn't touch upon is, you know, one of the, I want to say loopholes or areas in the law, the way it's written right now, are companies that are not fully affected by COVID today, but maybe, you know, if they're a lagging company, may have some effect 2-3 months down the line. You know, they've signed and adhered to a good faith certification, which is a gray area because it just asks you if you potentially will be affected by this COVID crisis. But those companies could be fully operating today and in the next 8-week period, and they will get the full benefit of the actual forgiveness of the loan. So it's a little counterintuitive, I think, to what the spirit of the CARES Act is, because they may not be affected today and they have no problems keeping their people on the payroll, but they will have nothing to pay back in terms of a loan after the period. So it's, you know, I don't think there's anything there that's going to change, but just, you know, reading the law and how actual businesses are operating today, there's definitely a benefit for fully operating companies today. So I think there's just a few other matters that we just wanted to introduce that aren't, there's one that may not be fully developed, but we just want to give you a little bit insight into those couple matters, and just to be aware of and to stay tuned if there's anything new that comes out in the coming days. So I don't know, Ryan, do you want to talk on a couple other brief topics and then we can go to questions?
Sure. So there's, as part of the CARES Act, there were also provisions related to payroll taxes and the employer's portion of that. There was a deferral of payroll taxes. You could defer the payment of your Social Security payroll tax for the remainder of 2020 and not make those payments until December 31st of 21. At 50%, and the other 50% December 31st to 22. There's also an employee retention credit, which allows for a credit for wages paid during an affected or specified period where the business is affected by COVID-19. These two provisions are exclusive from the PPP program. So if you are applying for the PPP, you cannot defer your payroll tax, or you cannot apply for the retention credit and be eligible for the loan forgiveness. So something to obviously be aware of, that you can't get both, but if one may be better than another depending on your fact pattern, and or if you're precluded from the PPP because of your structure or headcount, these other two programs could be beneficial, at least from a cash flow standpoint.
Yeah, the Main Street funding is the final that, as of yesterday, we still haven't heard anything in terms of signing it on. But Ryan did mention that, you know, if you're not within this 500 person threshold and you're not taking PPP, the only other option was the deferral or credit of payroll taxes. There's another 2.5 trillion that's going through Congress to be signed, potentially, and that is going to be mainly based on the not only a provision to refund these programs, but a large portion of that for the 500 to 10,000 employee tranche. So that middle area that has not been really served yet outside of the large corporate and the small business. Within that, you know, they're throwing around the potential ability to have loans that with very favorable terms, up to 30 years repayment. And there's just not enough information right now to give you any definitive terms around that. But I'm expecting that to come up sometime mid next week for a rollout into the addition to the CARES Act. So that's definitely something that if you're greater than 500 employees, you should be looking out for the relief around that.
And Jason, one thing to that really quick is the Main Street loan facility is likely going to be subject to compensation, stock repurchase, and distribution limitations. The PPP program, as it sits today, and I don't think it would really be possible for them to change this, but the PPP program is not subject to distribution or repurchase or compensation limitations outside of the $100,000. But that'll be a key component once we have more clarity on the Main Street loan program.
Great.
We've got 5 minutes left and a few questions. So Pierre-Marie, I don't know if you want to go through them very quickly.
Yeah, I have a question, Jason, for you. How applicable to the self-employed and individual contractors are the PPP and EIDL? And what do you suggest for the self-employed and individual contractors to do?
Yeah, so the self-employed and independent contractors that are not at the corporate level, which was last week's loan application process, the independent contractor was taken out of the equation for those companies. So today, you actually have the ability to go to your bank in order to apply for a paycheck protection program if you are a consultant or an independent contractor that's not tied directly to a corporation. So I would recommend that you go to your local bank or the bank that you currently are working with and start that process. There's, you know, again, real world is ideally if you have a business banking account, that is a bank I would go with. If it's just a personal bank account, you may have a little bit more of an extra step. You know, potentially having a credit card along with that bank as well will help you through the process. But that opened up today, the 10th, for non-corporate contractors. So individuals, okay, that would apply.
Okay. Do you have any insight on Bank of the West processing for practice on PPP?
So I have 3 clients that are going through the PPP process with Bank of the West. The application process was less painful than others. If that's a good thing. It was fairly straightforward. They had an additional form and required the 941s to be submitted along with an annual payroll statement, which my clients were able to get through their payroll provider. So it was relatively painless. I haven't received. They just did this Wednesday. So I haven't received any information if there's a loan been authorized yet, but it was submitted. It was accepted by Bank of the West, and we're just waiting for the SBA authorization and then the funding. But it was a pretty good process.
I'm just going to add that someone from Bank of the West, Thomas, just said that we will stop application tonight, 5 p.m.
Oh.
So that you know. I can see also that there is a question, I don't know, Pierre-Marie, if you want to read it out loud, from Benjamin Jabeuf, which is very precise.
Yeah. It was a precise question. Do you want to go over it, maybe, Jason?
So is that
you have time to read it?
The $100,000, 150,000? Yeah. So under that scenario, they would not need to add back the $50,000 reduction in salary because that individual was over 100,000 in 2019. So they would not be penalized for reducing that person's payroll.
Correct.
During the loan forgiveness.
Yeah, so the 25% reduction is based upon the cap of 100,000 when you're calculating the loan amount. So you would be okay.
Right. So if you drop them under 100,000, you would have some wage, potentially some of the wage add back. But if you kept them at 100,000, there wouldn't be an impact.
Yep.
There's another question from Richard Calbo asking, can you apply for PPP and Economy Injury Acts at the same time and in different banks?
So I could take that. The answer is you should probably apply for both, and depending on what the Economic Injury Act looks like to in the future, but I would recommend, yes, you can apply for both. And in terms, as long as you're not applying in different banks for one or the other, right? So as long as you're not applying for the PPP in multiple banks or the EIDL in multiple banks, there should be nothing that precludes you from getting your applications out there. I think at the point when the actual submissions are accepted, you're going to have to make a decision. Now, Ryan, is there still a caveat that if you get the EIDL, it could potentially be rolled into the PPP as long as you're using them for different purposes?
Right. So you can roll the EIDL into the PPP, and the funds have to be used for different purposes. You can, or the grant portion of the EIDL, the $10,000, is reduced from your loan forgiveness amount. So you can only get the $10,000, for free once. But you would be able to roll the EIDL into the PPP if that was your timing fact pattern.
Perfect. So I think we went through most of the questions. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Jason and Pierre-Marie, for sharing your knowledge on all of this. I think there are lots of questions in this time, so it was very important for us to go through all this. I also wanted to tell everyone that this session will be available on replay mode on our platform. So if you want to go back to the content, please connect on the platform and you will have access to all of these. Also, as you know, we're doing a lot of different webinars, so you will have the program available on our platform as well. And we are building up with the French Founders team an entire day of conferences that will take place on April 29th. And this conference will be about good news and what will happen, what we should be inspired by for the after crisis. So we'll have very high level speakers coming from all around the world, economists, key players, investors, So stay tuned because we will send you some information about this. Thank you to you three. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
And I wish you all a good rest of your day and a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.